Some moments are like a flash of lightning on a dark night. They illuminate everything, changing the landscape in an instant. This is a story about one of those moments. It's about a quiet waitress in a high-end restaurant, a billionaire whose wealth was matched only by his arrogance and a torrent of angry words spoken in a language he thought was his secret weapon. He intended to humiliate her to put her in her place. He assumed she was insignificant. But he was about to learn that the most profound stories are often hidden in the quietest people, and that a single perfectly spoken sentence can be more powerful than all the money in the world. La Belle Époque was a restaurant that sold nostalgia as its main course. Tucked away on a cobblestone side street in Boston's historic district, it was an island of old-world charm in a sea of glittering glass towers. Its owner, a kind, perpetually worried man named Marco Saletti, insisted on real tablecloths, fresh flowers on every table, and a staff that valued discretion above all else. The clientele were the city's old money, the political power brokers and the new money titans who came to feel like they belonged. Amelia Sterling was a ghost in this gilded cage. At 24, she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. She was efficient, observant, and almost entirely invisible, which was exactly how she liked it. Her uniform, a crisp black blouse and slacks, was her armor. Her quiet demeanor was her shield. Most patrons saw her as just another part of the decor, a functioning piece of the elegant machinery that brought them their pan-seared scallops and vintage Bordeaux. They didn't see the smudges of charcoal that were perpetually under her fingernails, no matter how hard she scrubbed. They didn't see the fatigue behind her hazel eyes, a fatigue that came not just from working double shifts, but from the weight of a life lived before this one. They didn't know that in her tiny, sparsely furnished apartment, sketches of buildings covered every inch of wall space. Not modern skyscrapers, but detailed, loving renderings of ancient archways, intricate courtyards and majestic public squares, reconstructions of a city thousands of miles away, a city she could now only visit in memory. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a student of architecture at the City College, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a burning, desperate need to rebuild what had been lost. On that particular Tuesday evening, the air in La Belle Époque was thick with the low hum of expensive conversations. A storm was brewing outside, and the dim, warm light of the restaurant felt like a sanctuary. Amelia was gliding between tables, refilling water glasses and clearing plates. Her mind partially on a difficult structural engineering problem she was wrestling with for her midterm project. Then he walked in. Samuel Chevalier was not a man who entered a room. He conquered it. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than Amelia's entire semester of tuition, and he radiated an aura of raw, predatory power. He was a real estate mogul, a corporate raider, a man who saw cities not as places where people lived, but as chessboards on which to build his empire. With him were two younger men, Leo Martinez and Richard Powell, both looking nervous and eager to please like jackals in the orbit of a lion. Mr. Saletti greeted them personally, his usual warmth replaced by a palpable tension. Amelia, from her vantage point by the service station, knew why. Chevalier's company, Chevalier Global, had recently bought the entire block, including the historic building that housed La Belle Époque. The eviction notice, couched in cold corporate legalese, was pinned to the bulletin board in the kitchen. For months, Mr. Saletti had been fighting it, pleading his case that the restaurant was a landmark, a piece of the city's soul. To Chevalier, it was just an obsolete structure sitting on a plot of land, destined for a new 50-story luxury tower. The corner booth Saletti Chevalier commanded, not asked. "And bring your best bottle of scotch. We're celebrating a victory." Mr. Saletti's face fell, but he nodded and led them to the best table in the house. Amelia was assigned their section. Her stomach tightened. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and walked toward the lion's den. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I start you with some water?" she asked, her voice calm and even. Chevalier didn't even look at her. He was busy scrolling through something on his phone. "Just get the scotch," he snapped, waving a dismissive hand. Richard Powell, the more sycophantic of the two associates, smirked. The man said, "The best bottle, darling. Don't bring us the cheap stuff." Amelia simply nodded. "Of course, sir." For the next hour, she served them with flawless professionalism. She remained impassive as Chevalier loudly berated an underling on the phone about a deal in Dubai, his voice cutting through the restaurant's genteel ambiance. She ignored the condescending way Richard ordered his food, as if speaking to a child. Leo, the other associate, was quieter occasionally, glancing at Amelia with a flicker of what looked like sympathy before quickly looking away, unwilling to cross his boss. The tension at the table was centered on Chevalier. He was restless, agitated, a man accustomed to constant motion, who found the simple act of sitting for a meal to be an inconvenience. He treated the restaurant and its staff as an extension of his will. When his steak wasn't cooked to his precise liking, he sent it back without a word, simply pushing the plate to the edge of the table with a look of disgust. Amelia handled it all with the same placid efficiency. She had dealt with difficult customers before. She had dealt with far worse things in her life than a rich man's temper. She was a stone in a river, letting the current of his arrogance wash over her. The fateful moment came with the coffee. The storm had broken, and rain was now lashing against the windows. Chevalier was in the middle of a tirade about bureaucratic red tape holding up his new tower, the very tower that would replace this restaurant. He was gesticulating wildly, his hand slicing through the air. Amelia approached to refill his coffee cup. She moved carefully as always. More coffee. Mr. Chevalier. He didn't hear her or didn't care. As she leaned in with the pot, his hand shot out in a gesture of frustration. It collided with her arm. The coffee pot tipped, and hot, dark liquid cascaded onto the table, splashing across the pristine white cloth, and most critically onto a stack of architectural blueprints he had just unrolled. A sudden dead silence fell over the table. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into nothingness. Chevalier stared at the spreading brown stain on his plans. His face, which had been flushed with anger, turned pale with fury. He slowly lifted his gaze from the ruined papers to Amelia. His eyes were like chips of ice. Richard Powell gasped. "You clumsy girl, do you have any idea what you've done?" Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask. "I am so sorry, sir. It was an accident." Chevalier pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stood up, towering over her. The entire restaurant was now watching. He didn't raise his voice. He did something far more cruel. He lowered it, making his venom more personal, more intimate. He leaned in close, so only she could hear, and his expression twisted into a sneer. He assumed, like most people, that a waitress in a Boston restaurant would be just another American. He decided to use a language he'd picked up during his ruthless business dealings in the Middle East, a language he used to show off, to dominate, to draw a line between himself and the little people. He switched to Arabic. The words were guttural, sharp, and dripping with contempt. He switched to Arabic, his words guttural and sharp, dripping with contempt. You street dog, you are nothing. At least animals have a purpose. But you're nothing more than a waste of air. He had called her a street dog. He had told her she was nothing. That at least animals have a purpose, but she was just a waste of air. It was a vile, deeply personal insult, designed to shatter the dignity of someone he believed couldn't possibly understand it. He smiled a cold, triumphant little cirque, expecting to see confusion, maybe fear in her eyes. He straightened up, ready to demand that Mr. Saletti fire her on the spot. He had delivered his final crushing blow. But Amelia didn't look confused. She didn't look scared. For the first time all evening, the mask of the invisible waitress slipped. Her posture changed. She stood up straighter, her spine stiffening as if forged from steel. She lifted her chin, and her hazel eyes met his directly. The fatigue in them was gone, replaced by a fire that seemed to burn away years of quiet suffering. A beat of silence passed, and then she answered him. The Arabic that Samuel Chevalier had spoken was functional, the kind a foreigner learns in a boardroom to intimidate and impress. It was clipped modern and carried the harsh accent of someone who had memorized words without ever understanding their soul. The Arabic that Amelia Sterling spoke in return was like poetry. It flowed from her not as a learned language, but as a mother tongue imbued with the soft melodic cadence of the Levant. It was the dialect of scholars and poets, the ancient lyrical Arabic of her native Aleppo, a city renowned for its culture long before it became known for its ruins. She did not shout. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the silence of the restaurant with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Amelia answered him in flawless lyrical Arabic, her tone calm yet cutting. The stray dogs you speak of, sir, are more loyal than men who forget that their hearts are not merely pumps for blood. The words hung in the air, intricate and devastating. Samuel Chevalier's smirk froze on his face. His eyes widened, the icy confidence draining from them to be replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. His two associates, Richard and Leo, looked back and forth between him and Amelia, their faces masks of confusion. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the seismic shift in power that had just occurred. Amelia had just told him with breathtaking fluency. The street dogs you speak of, sir, are more loyal than men who forget their hearts are not merely muscles for pumping blood. She wasn't finished. She held his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. She continued, her eyes unwavering, still speaking in Arabic. Perhaps you should spend less time building glass towers and more time looking into the mirror. You might be terrified by the emptiness that stares back at you. Perhaps you should spend less time building glass towers and more time looking in the mirror. You might be frightened by the emptiness that stares back at you. Every syllable was perfect. Every intonation was weighted with a meaning that went far beyond the literal translation. She had taken his crude insult and turned it back on him, not with equal vulgarity, but with a profound and piercing elegance. She had exposed his spiritual poverty with the very language he had tried to use as a weapon. Samuel Chevalier was for the first time in his adult life speechless. It was as if she had reached into his chest and momentarily stopped his heart. He, a man who built his empire on words, on threats, on negotiations, on commands, had no words left. He could only stare at this waitress, this nothing who had so completely and utterly dismantled him. Who was she? Where did this come from? His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. The fluency, the accent. It wasn't something one picked up in a university class. It was lived. It was breathed. It was the sound of a home he had only ever visited to plunder. The spell was broken by Mr. Saletti rushing to the table. Chevalier. Amelia. What is going on here? Is everything all right? Amelia's gaze finally broke from Chevalier's. She turned to her boss, and the fire in her eyes softened into a familiar, weary resolve. The ghost was back, but changed. "It's all right, Marco," she said in English, her voice steady. "There was a spill. I was just apologizing to the gentleman." Apologizing. The word seemed absurd. She had just performed a verbal execution, and she was calling it an apology. Chevalier found his voice, but it was raspy, unfamiliar. "Get my coat," he said to Richard, not taking his eyes off Amelia. "But Samuel, the deal. We were going to—" Richard stammered. Now Chevalier's voice was a low growl. Richard and Leo scrambled to their feet, fumbling with their jackets. Chevalier continued to stare at Amelia. It was no longer a look of arrogance or anger. It was something else entirely, a bewildered, searching gaze, as if he were trying to see past her uniform and into the very core of her being. He dropped a few $100 bills onto the table, far more than the bill. But it wasn't a tip. It felt like a retreat, a surrender. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the restaurant, his associates trailing in his wake like confused pilot fish. The heavy oak door swung shut behind them, leaving a profound and ringing silence in their wake. The restaurant for a moment remained frozen. Every eye was on Amelia. She stood by the stained tablecloth, a lone coffee pot in her hand, looking small and yet somehow larger than anyone else in the room. Then an elderly man in a tweed jacket, sitting at a nearby table, began to clap. He was slow, deliberate. He was Dr. Alistair Albright, a retired professor of Middle Eastern studies from Harvard, and a regular at La Belle Époque for 20 years. He had understood every single word that had been exchanged. His applause was soon joined by a few other patrons, a scattered, hesitant sound at first, which then grew into a warm wave of support. Amelia looked around, flustered, the color rising in her cheeks. This was the opposite of the invisibility she craved. She felt exposed, vulnerable. She gave a small, shaky nod to the room, then quickly turned and fled to the relative safety of the kitchen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In the kitchen, the staff buzzed with questions. "What did you say to him, Maria?" Another waitress asked, her eyes wide. "I've never seen anyone shut down a guy like that." Amelia leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, taking deep breaths. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't tell them that for a fleeting moment, she wasn't Amelia Sterling, the waitress. She was Amira al-Jamil, the daughter of Khalid al-Jamil, the most respected architect in Aleppo. She was the girl who had grown up listening to her father recite the poetry of al-Mutanabbi, while sketching designs for new libraries and restoring ancient mosques. The language Chevalier had used as a weapon was the language of her lullabies, of her father's wisdom, of her lost home. When he had twisted it into something ugly, he hadn't just insulted her, he had desecrated a memory. And for the first time since she had fled her war-torn country, the quiet, broken part of her had roared back to life. But as the adrenaline faded, a cold dread began to seep in. She hadn't just answered back to a rude customer. She had publicly humiliated Samuel Chevalier, a man who bulldozed whatever and whoever stood in his way. A man who held the fate of Mr. Saletti's restaurant, her only source of income, in the palm of his hand. She had won the battle of words, but she was terrified she had just started a war she could never hope to win. The world outside La Belle Époque moved at the speed of light. Samuel Chevalier had assumed his vicious private insult would be a self-contained explosion, a momentary exertion of power. He failed to account for the ubiquitous eyes and ears of the 21st century. At a small table near the window, a young tech entrepreneur had been dining with his girlfriend. He hadn't understood the Arabic, but he recognized raw drama when he saw it. The tense atmosphere, the billionaire's snarling face, the waitress's sudden, powerful transformation. It was captivating. He had discreetly started recording on his phone just as Chevalier leaned in to deliver his insult. He captured the whole exchange, the ugly Arabic, Amelia's stunning lyrical reply, Chevalier's dumbfounded expression, and the final satisfying applause from the professor. He hadn't even paid his bill before he uploaded it. He gave it a simple, clickable title. Billionaire D-Bag Gets Owned in Fluent Arabic by Boston Waitress. He tagged several local news outlets and gossip blogs. Then he went back to his dessert. By the time Amelia was finishing her shift, wiping down the last of the tables, and helping Mr. Saletti lock up the video, was no longer a spark. It was a wildfire. It ripped through Twitter, was shared tens of thousands of times on Facebook, and became the top post on Reddit's public freakout and justice served forums. People were mesmerized. Commentators who spoke Arabic quickly provided translations, and with each translation the story grew. Chevalier's crude insult was laid bare for the world to see, contrasted with the poetic, devastating grace of Amelia's response. She became an overnight folk hero. They didn't know her name, so they gave her one: the Aleppo Waitress. The nickname began trending. People praised her courage, her dignity, her intelligence. They marveled at the sheer, unadulterated class of her takedown. Memes were created. The image of her calm face opposite Chevalier's stunned expression became a symbol of quiet defiance against arrogant power. Amelia knew none of this. She walked home through the rain-slicked streets, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. She was racked with a mixture of pride and terror. The pride was a forgotten feeling, a warm ember from a life she thought was extinguished. The terror was all too familiar. She worried about Mr. Saletti. She worried about her job, her tuition, her fragile, carefully constructed new life. She arrived at her small apartment, the scent of turpentine and old paper a comfort. She switched on her laptop to work on her midterm project, but her mind was too scattered. On a whim, she opened a browser and typed in La Belle Époque. The search results hit her like a physical blow. Her face, or rather a blurry, pixelated version of it from the video, was everywhere. News headlines screamed at her, "Who is the mystery?" Waitress who put Samuel Chevalier in his place. Boston billionaire's Arabic insult backfires in viral video. The Aleppo. Waitress. A story of grace under fire. She clicked on the video, her hand trembling. She watched the scene unfold from a stranger's perspective. She heard her own voice speaking the language of her childhood, and a wave of profound sorrow and homesickness washed over her. She heard her father's voice in her own cadence. She saw her mother's strength in her posture. The video was only a minute long, but it contained her entire history. Her phone buzzed. It was Mr. Saletti. Amelia. "Are you seeing this?" His voice was strained with panic. I am Marco. I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this. It's not your fault, child, he said, though his tone betrayed his fear. You did what anyone with dignity would do. But Amelia, Chevalier is not a man who forgives. He's not a man who forgets. This is bad. I got an email from his lawyers an hour ago. They're terminating our lease. The grace period is void. We have 30 days to vacate. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. 30 days. But that's illegal. Your contract. He has the best lawyers money can buy. Amelia, they found a loophole, a technicality. It doesn't matter if it's legal. By the time I fight it in court, we'll be long gone. He's not just demolishing the building anymore. He's punishing us. He's punishing me because of you. The words, though not meant to be cruel, pierced her heart. She was the cause. Her moment of defiance had cost this kind man his livelihood, his life's work. The jobs of her friends, Maria, the cooks, the dishwashers, were all gone because of her. The guilt was crushing, heavier than any insult Chevalier could have thrown at her. Meanwhile, in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Samuel Chevalier was watching the same video. But he wasn't feeling guilt. He was feeling a rage so pure and cold it was almost sublime. It wasn't the insult that bothered him. It was the loss of control. The public humiliation. He had spent a lifetime cultivating an image of untouchable power, and in 60 seconds, a no-name waitress had shattered it. His phone had been ringing incessantly. His PR team was in full panic mode. The board of directors was demanding an explanation. A major investor from Abu Dhabi, a man whose respect he had worked for years to gain, had sent him a one-line text message. This is not how strong men behave. Find her. He seethed to the head of his personal security. A formidable man named Carter. I don't mean her name from the restaurant payroll. I want to know everything. Where she was born, where she went to school, what she ate for breakfast. I want to know who gave her the right to look at me that way. Find out who she is. And I mean everything. Carter, a man accustomed to digging up corporate espionage and hidden financial records, nodded. It will be done, Mr. Chevalier. Samuel turned back to the screen, pausing the video on Amelia's face. The defiant look in her eyes was like a personal challenge. He was a man who razed buildings, crushed competitors, and reshaped city skylines. He would not be undone by a waitress. He would find her, and he would use the information to crush her to reassert his dominance. He would prove that in his world, people like her did not get the last word. The digital wildfire was burning now, but he would be the one to control the ashes. Carter was brutally efficient. He was a former intelligence analyst who moved through the digital and physical world with silent, surgical precision. For him, uncovering the life of Amelia Sterling was a trivial matter. Within 24 hours, a sleek, encrypted file landed in Samuel Chevalier's inbox. The subject line was simple A, Sterling, full dossier. Samuel opened it in his sterile, glass-walled office, the city of Boston spread out beneath him like a map. He expected to find a story of mundane struggle. Perhaps a second-generation immigrant, a student visa, a history of working menial jobs. He was looking for leverage, for a weakness, for a pressure point he could use to silence her and repair his public image. What he found was a ghost story. The first page was standard information. Name, Amelia Sterling. Age 24. Current address. A tenement building in Alston. Occupation waitress, La Belle Époque. Student, Boston City College, School of Architecture. He paused. Architecture. A flicker of something annoyance, surprise passed through him. He looked at the half-finished model of his own Chevalier Tower that stood in the corner of his office. He dismissed the thought and read on. The next section was her immigration history. Status political refugee. Granted asylum 5 years ago. Country of origin, Syria. City of origin, Aleppo. This gave him another pause. Aleppo. The name was a headline, a tragedy he'd read about in the Wall Street Journal over his morning espresso. A place of rubble and dust. It explained her accent, but it didn't explain the fire in her eyes, the regal dignity. Then he clicked on the next file, labeled Family History, and the world tilted on its axis. The file contained scanned documents, translated birth certificates, and old newspaper clippings. Her name wasn't originally Amelia Sterling. It was an anglicization she'd adopted for a new life. Birth name, Amira Al-Jamil. The name Al-Jamil meant nothing to him, but the name of her father, which appeared next, hit him like a physical blow. Father Dr. Khalid Al-Jamil, occupation architect and professor of architectural history, University of Aleppo. Samuel's blood ran cold. He leaned forward, his face inches from the screen. It couldn't be. He scrambled to open a new browser tab and typed the name Khalid Al-Jamil. The search results were filled with academic journals, architectural magazines, and tributes from UNESCO. Khalid Al-Jamil wasn't just an architect. He was a legend, a visionary who had seamlessly blended modern structural techniques with ancient Islamic design. He was famous for his restoration of the Great Mosque of Aleppo and his designs for public libraries and cultural centers across the Levant. He was a purist, a poet in stone and steel. Years ago, when Samuel was just starting out, hungry and ambitious, he had studied the work of the world's great architects. He had a secret appreciation for the masters, a side of himself he never showed his cutthroat business partners. He remembered seeing a profile on Khalid Al-Jamil in an international design magazine. He had been captivated by the man's philosophy that buildings should serve the soul of a community, not just the ego of their creator. He had dismissed it at the time as naive, but the elegance of Al-Jamil's designs had stayed with him. The dossier continued, and the story turned dark. It included satellite photos and Red Cross reports. The Al-Jamil family home, a beautiful example of traditional Aleppine architecture that Khalid had restored himself, was in a neighborhood that had been hit by a barrel bomb. The report listed the casualties. Khalid Al-Jamil, deceased. Samira Al-Jamil, spouse, deceased. Karim Al-Jamil, son, age 12. Deceased. One survivor was listed. Amira Al-Jamil, age 19. She had been pulled from the rubble by neighbors. She spent 2 months in a makeshift refugee camp clinic before making the perilous journey through Turkey, then to Europe, and finally through a UN refugee program to the United States. The final document in the file was a photograph. It was a scanned copy of an old family portrait. A smiling man with kind, intelligent eyes, Khalid Al-Jamil, stood with his arm around a beautiful woman. In front of them stood a young boy kicking a soccer ball and a teenage girl with long dark hair and the same hazel eyes that had stared him down in the restaurant. She was smiling, full of a light and life that he had not seen. She was holding a sketch pad and a pencil. Samuel Chevalier leaned back in his leather chair, the silence of his office pressing in on him. The air seemed thin, hard to breathe. He felt a cold, hollow feeling spread through his chest. This wasn't a waitress. This was the sole survivor of a lineage of genius. This was the daughter of a man he had in a secret professional corner of his soul admired. He had stood over this woman, this orphan who had lost everything, and called her a street dog. He had mocked her as a waste of air, in the very language her father had likely used to teach her about poetry and beauty. The blueprints for his Chevalier Tower, stained with the coffee she had spilled, were still on his credenza. He looked at them, at the sharp angles, the cold glass, the imposing, sterile structure designed to scream his own name into the sky. For the first time, he saw it through another set of eyes. He imagined what Khalid al-Jamil would think of it. He imagined what Amira al-Jamil Amelia Sterling thought of it. You might be frightened by the emptiness that stares back at you. Her words echoed in his mind, no longer an insult, but a prophecy. He was looking at his life, at his empire, at his tower, and he was seeing the emptiness, the utter profound lack of soul. The rage was gone. The need for revenge had evaporated. In its place was something deeply unsettling, something he hadn't felt in decades. Shame. He had wanted to find a weakness, a pressure point to destroy her. Instead, he had found a story of unimaginable strength and a mirror that showed him the poverty of his own character. He had set out to crush a ghost, and the ghost had turned around and shown him that he was the one who was truly haunted. His plan for revenge was now in ashes, but he had no idea what to build in its place. The viral video and the subsequent public shaming of Samuel Chevalier had an unintended consequence. It brought Amelia's story to the attention of Dr. Alistair Albright, the Harvard professor who had started the applause in the restaurant. He had been haunted by the exchange, by the purity of her Alpine dialect. He sought her out. He found her not at the now shuttering La Belle Époque, but at the City College library, hunched over a drafting table, her face illuminated by the glow of a lamp. She looked exhausted but determined. He introduced himself, gently speaking a few words in the same classical Arabic she had used. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "I was there that night," he explained in English. "I was a professor of Middle Eastern history. What you did, the dignity you showed, it was remarkable." Hesitantly, Amelia began to talk. For the first time since coming to America, she told someone her story. Not the sanitized refugee version, but the real one. She spoke of her father, his work, her dream of following in his footsteps, and the crushing guilt she now felt over the fate of La Belle Époque. Dr. Albright listened, his expression growing more grave with each word. "Amelia," he said finally, his voice firm, "you have nothing to be guilty about. A man like Chevalier is a force of nature like a hurricane. You just happened to be the one who stood in his path. But you didn't break." He paused. "Your father, Khalid al-Jamil, he was a great man. His loss was a loss for the entire world. His work must not be forgotten. Your work must not be forgotten." Inspired and emboldened by her story, Dr. Albright made a few calls. He was retired, but his name still carried immense weight. He spoke to a journalist at the Boston Globe, a former student of his known for her in-depth, compassionate reporting. He contacted the city's Historical Landmark Commission. He didn't just tell them about a waitress who was wronged. He told them the story of Amira al-Jamil, the heiress to an architectural legacy, and how the last vestige of her new life was about to be bulldozed by the very man who had insulted her heritage. The narrative began to shift. The story was no longer just about a rude billionaire. It became a story about culture, history, and preservation. It was David versus Goliath. But now David had a backstory that resonated with the entire city. Protests, small at first, began to form outside the boarded-up La Belle Époque. Students from Amelia's college joined in holding signs that read, "Boston's soul is not for sale, and build bridges, not towers." The Historical Commission, under public pressure, announced an emergency review of the building's landmark status, a move that would temporarily halt any demolition permits. Samuel Chevalier found himself in an entirely new kind of war. It wasn't a corporate takeover he could win with hostile bids and backroom deals. It was a battle for public opinion, and he was losing catastrophically. The story of the architect's daughter was far more compelling than the story of the wronged billionaire. His attempts at damage control, a sterile lawyer-approved apology released by his PR firm, were met with ridicule and scorn. His investors were getting nervous. The Chevalier Tower project was now mired in bad press and bureaucratic delays. His brand, once synonymous with power and success, was becoming synonymous with bullying and cultural vandalism. He sat in his office, the dossier, on Amelia still open on his computer. He had two choices. He could double down, use his army of lawyers to crush the opposition, fight the city, and eventually build his monument to emptiness. He would win eventually. He always did. But the victory would be hollow, built on a foundation of public hatred and his own private shame. Or he could do something else, something he had never done before. He could cede control. He could admit defeat. He looked at the picture of the smiling Al-Jamil family. He looked at the teenage girl with the sketch pad. He thought of her in the library, drawing buildings from memory, while he sat in his tower of glass, counting his money. His phone rang. It was Leo Martinez, his quieter, more observant associate. Sir Leo said, his voice hesitant. "I've been following the news. This is not going away." "What's your point, Leo?" Samuel snapped, his old impatience flaring. "My point, sir, is that maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. We're trying to silence her. Maybe we should be listening to her." It was a brave thing to say, and Leo knew he was risking his career. Samuel was silent for a long moment. The old him would have fired Leo on the spot for such insubordination, but the old him hadn't been so thoroughly dissected by a few lines of poetry. "Get the car, Leo." Samuel said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual arrogance. "We're going for a ride, and find out where I can find Amelia Sterling. Not to serve her papers, to talk." Leo was stunned. "Yes, sir." "Right away, sir." As Samuel stood up, his eyes fell once more on the model of the Chevalier Tower. He walked over to it, this monument to his own ego. He looked at its sterile lines, its soulless ambition, and with a sudden decisive movement, he swept his arm across the pedestal, sending the multi-million-dollar model crashing to the floor in a shower of shattered plastic and broken dreams. He didn't look back at the wreckage. He was going to build something new. Finding Amelia wasn't hard. Dr. Albright had become a protective figure in her life, and when Leo Martinez called him explaining that Mr. Chevalier wished to speak with her in person, the old professor was skeptical. "He will not harass her," Leo insisted. "This is not about intimidation. I give you my word. He wants to meet on neutral ground. Your choice." After a long conversation with Amelia, who was both terrified and strangely resolute, a meeting was arranged. The location she chose was not a law office or a boardroom, but the Boston Public Library's main courtyard, an open, peaceful space itself, a masterpiece of architecture surrounded by graceful arches and the quiet rustle of turning pages. Amelia arrived first, sitting on a stone bench near the fountain. She clutched her worn sketchbook to her chest like a shield. When Samuel Chevalier arrived, he was alone. No associates, no bodyguards. He wasn't wearing his usual power suit, but a simple dark sweater and trousers. He looked smaller somehow, without the armor of his wealth. He stopped a few feet away from her, his hands in his pockets. The bustling noise of the city seemed to fade away. "Miss Sterling," he began, his voice low. "Amira." Hearing him say her real name sent a jolt through her. It was both intimate and unnerving. "Thank you for meeting me," he continued. He didn't offer a handshake. He seemed to know it wouldn't be welcome. "The things I said to you, the apology my lawyers wrote. None of it is enough. It was despicable. There is no excuse." Amelia watched him, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, simply waiting. "I didn't just look up your name," he confessed, his gaze dropping to the stone floor for a moment. "I looked up everything. Your family. Your father." He looked back at her, his eyes holding a new raw honesty. "I knew his work. Years ago. I admired it. He was a true artist. What happened to him, to your family, is a tragedy beyond words." Amelia's knuckles were white where she gripped her sketchbook. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This man had no right to her grief. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To make me feel sorry for you?" "No," he said quickly. "To make you understand. The man who said those things to you in the restaurant, he was a product of a world that your father's work stood against. A world of ego, of demolition, of forgetting the past. When you answered me, you reminded me of that." He took a step closer. "My tower. The project. I've cancelled it." Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief. "You cancelled it? What about the restaurant? Mr. Saletti?" "The building will not be demolished. I've already contacted Mr. Saletti's lawyer. I'm reinstating his lease indefinitely, and I am personally paying for the damages my legal threats have caused his business. The Historical Commission can stand down." This was more than she had ever expected. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy washed over her. Marco was safe. Her friends' jobs were safe. But she was still wary. A man like this didn't just give up. Why, she asked the single word hanging in the air. Because Samuel said, "I want to build something else. Something better. And I can't do it without you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out not a legal document, but a rolled-up piece of drafting paper. He spread it out on the bench between them. It was a blank site plan of the block where La Belle Époque stood. "I still own the land around the restaurant," he explained. "But I'm not building a monument to myself anymore. I want to build a center for art and culture. A place for immigrants, for refugees. A place that celebrates the heritage of the people who make this city what it is. A place with libraries, galleries, and performance spaces. A place with gardens like the ones that once graced the courtyards of Aleppo." He looked at her, his expression intense. "But I am a man who builds with glass and steel. I don't know how to build with soul. Your father did. And I see his eyes when I look at you. I see his talent in the way you hold that sketchbook." He tapped the blank paper. I am offering you a full scholarship to any architecture program in the country. MIT, Harvard. Your choice. All expenses paid. And I am offering you a job starting now as a paid consultant on this project. I don't want you to be a waitress anymore. I want you to be an architect. Help me build something that honors his memory instead of just another empty tower. Amelia was stunned into silence. Her mind was reeling. It was an impossible offer, a fairy tale solution born from a nightmare. Was it a trick? A way to co-opt her story and salvage his reputation? She searched his face for any sign of deceit, but saw only a profound weariness and a flicker of desperate hope. She thought of her father. He believed that architecture could heal, that buildings could be bridges between cultures, between past and future. He would not have wanted her to be defined by bitterness and anger. He would have wanted her to build. Slowly she uncurled her fingers from her sketchbook. She opened it to a page she had been working on the night before. It wasn't a memory of Aleppo. It was a new design, a concept for a modern public library, but with a soaring central atrium designed like a traditional Syrian courtyard, complete with geometric archways and a fountain at its center. It was a fusion of her past and her present. She slid the sketchbook across the bench to him. Samuel looked down at the drawing. He saw the elegant lines, the thoughtful use of light and space, the deep respect for history blended with a bold vision for the future. He saw Khalid al-Jamil's soul refined and reborn in his daughter's hands. A slow smile, the first genuine one Amelia had ever seen from him, touched his lips. Yes, he breathed, his voice filled with awe. Something exactly like this. Amelia looked from her sketch to the powerful man beside her, and for the first time she did not see an enemy. She saw a partner. She saw a chance not just to rebuild the ruins of her memory, but to build a future she had never dared to imagine. "All right, Mr. Chevalier," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's get to work." The news of the partnership between Samuel Chevalier and Amelia Sterling sent shockwaves through the city, far greater than the initial viral video. It was a story of redemption, collaboration, and hope that eclipsed the simple narrative of conflict. The project was officially announced in a press conference held fittingly in the reopened and bustling La Belle Époque, with a beaming Marco Saletti looking on. It was named the Al-Jamil Center for Cultural Heritage. The next few years were a whirlwind for Amelia. She accepted the scholarship to MIT's prestigious School of Architecture and Planning, but her education was not confined to the classroom. She worked side by side with Samuel and a world-class team of architects he assembled. At first, their dynamic was cautious. Samuel, humbled and transformed, learned to listen. He had spent his life dictating terms. Now he learned to ask questions. He watched, fascinated, as Amelia, or Amira, as she now asked her friends and colleagues to call her, commanded a room not with volume, but with quiet, unshakable competence. She argued for materials, for designs, for public spaces, with a passion that came from a place he was only just beginning to understand. She fought for every archway, every courtyard, every detail that would make the center a place of welcome and refuge, not just a building. Amira, in turn, learned from him. She learned the practical language of zoning laws, budgets, and engineering logistics. He taught her how to navigate the ruthless world of construction, while she taught him that a building's true value couldn't be measured in square footage or rental income. They forged an unlikely, powerful alliance built on a shared goal and mutual hard-won respect. Leo Martinez, the associate who had advised Samuel to listen, was promoted to oversee the project, his compassionate instincts finally rewarded. Richard Powell, unable to adapt to the company's new ethos, quietly resigned. Dr. Albright was appointed to the center's board of directors, ensuring its mission would always stay true to its founding principles. On a crisp autumn day, 5 years after their fateful encounter, the Al Jamil Center opened its doors to the public. It was a breathtaking piece of architecture. It did not scrape the sky like the tower Samuel had once envisioned. Instead, it embraced the street. Its facade of pale limestone and warm wood was intricately carved with geometric patterns that recalled ancient Syrian art. La Belle Époque was nestled perfectly into its corner, its old-world charm preserved and celebrated. The heart of the center was the vast, sunlit atrium Amira had first sketched in her notebook. A fountain bubbled peacefully at its center, the sound of water a soothing balm. Galleries branched off, showcasing the art of immigrant and refugee artists. A state-of-the-art library was filled with books in dozens of languages. A performance hall hosted musicians and poets from around the world. It was more than a building. It was a living, breathing testament to the idea that a city's greatest strength is its people and their stories. On the opening day, a dedication ceremony was held in the main atrium. Amira, now a confident, poised architect, stood at the podium. She looked out at the diverse crowd, at Marco Saletti, wiping a tear from his eye, at Dr. Albright, beaming with pride, and at Samuel Chevalier, standing not in the spotlight, but quietly at the side, watching her with an expression of profound respect. "Buildings are not just stone and glass," Amira said, her voice echoing in the space she had designed. "They are memories. They are shelters. They are stages where human life unfolds. My father taught me that the role of an architect is not to impose a vision onto a community, but to listen to its heart and give it a physical form. This center is a testament to that belief. It is for every person who has ever had to start over. It is proof that from the deepest rubble, something beautiful and new can always be built." Later that day, as the sun set, casting long shadows through the great arches, Amira found Samuel standing by the fountain. "He would have been proud of you," Samuel said quietly. "Not just for this building, but for the woman you've become." Amira watched the water dance in the fading light. "He would have been surprised by you," she replied, a small, genuine smile on her face. "I think he would have liked the man you've become." The anger and pun of that night in the restaurant felt like it belonged to another lifetime. It was a flash of lightning that had, in the end, illuminated a path forward for them both. One had learned to see beyond wealth and power, and the other had found a way to reclaim her voice and her heritage, not by dwelling on the past, but by building a bold and beautiful future for everyone. And in the heart of the city, the center stood as a permanent reminder. The most powerful structures are not built on foundations of steel, but of dignity, respect, and a willingness to truly see one another. The story of Amelia Sterling and Samuel Chevalier is a powerful reminder that every single person we meet is carrying a history we know nothing about. An act of arrogance, a careless insult, can be a spark that either ignites a fire of destruction or, if we're lucky, illuminates a path to profound change. This wasn't just about a billionaire being put in his place. It was about two people from opposite ends of the earth finding common ground in the most unexpected way, proving that empathy is the strongest material from which we can build a better world. It's a testament to the fact that our deepest wounds can often become the source of our greatest strength. If this story moved you and reminded you to look for the hidden depths in everyone around you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who appreciates stories of resilience and redemption. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that inspire challenge and ultimately connect us all. Thank you for listening.